Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our Nancy Drew Games review series, where we are ranking every single Nancy Drew game on 6 key aspects, being the story and premise of each game, the suspects, the puzzles, the music, the atmosphere, and the ending. I'm your host, Jameson.
And I'm Julian. What's going on, everybody?
And today we are reviewing Nancy Drew number 28, The Ghost of Thornton Hall.
The Ghost of Thornton Hall is easily one of the best Nancy Drew games of all time, and for some reason, when I think of what Nancy Drew games would be a best interpretation as a movie, this comes to mind.
It's a very cinematic game.
It's a cinematic game with great storytelling and twists and scares. It's one of the scariest games of all time, easily. It's just so well done, and I've been really waiting for this review.
Some shrewd fans of the franchise may be able to point out that this is the second time that they did a Southern Gothic take on a Nancy Drew, the first being Legend of the Crystal Skull, and in that game we had the spooky down south New Orleans vibes, we had the big old house, we had the cemeteries, and you might think, what else is there to do? Well, I can assure you that in Ghost of Thornton Hall, they do everything that Legend of the Crystal Skull did and more, and everything that it didn't do. And it ultimately is just as good of a game, if not better or worse in some areas. So that's really impressive that they were able to pull off the whole Southern Gothic shtick twice.
Yeah, I mean, the game's setting makes it so perfectly eerie. I literally never feel safe anywhere in the game. It's just so on edge. That's the one word I would use to describe this, 2 words really. On edge while I'm playing this game. But anyways, we should jump into the review now, in which story and premise is actually going to make up like a bulk of it, because there's a lot to cover.
There is definitely a lot to unpack. So, for one thing, story-wise, this game is easily comparable to Shadow at the Water's Edge, as it is probably the only game that is parallel in terms of the scary factor. But also, it shares a phone contact, a very important phone contact, being Savannah Woodham. So, the game begins with Nancy being rustled awake by a phone call in the middle of the night in her bedroom in River Heights, because she gets a call from Savannah, who she hasn't talked to in like 4 or 5 cases, and Savannah says that she's got a case for Nancy, and that she needs her to get down to Georgia right away, and she's paid for her plane ticket, and she needs her to get to Black Rock Island in the old Thornton Hall estate. And in short, what's going on is Jessalyn Thornton, who is one of the last beacons of hope in the Thornton family tree, a young woman who everyone seems to agree on and likes, has disappeared at her bachelorette party exploring the old, spooky, dilapidated family estate. And the only person who was with her was her best friend Addison, and nobody knows what happened to her. The whole workforce is combing the woods for her, and there's a family presence established at the house and the surrounding properties, and Nancy has been called in to go and see what happened.
So, the game really starts off with the ferryman dropping off Nancy on, like, the island or the dock or something, and I always forget that this case technically does take place on an island. It certainly doesn't feel like it.
Well, I don't think that's an island in, like, the traditional term, like that there's a lake or an ocean in between it. It's more like just a marsh or a swamp of sorts.
In the story and premise, I think we need to cover just a very brief rundown of the Thornton family.
So as you're pulling up, the ferryman gives you a couple of warnings that I think are really foreboding for the rest of the game. He says, "Are you sure about this?" for one thing, saying if Nancy doesn't want to ride back to town, and Nancy insists that she's positive. And he says, well, then just explore at your own risk. Best make sure that Wade's not skulking around the cemetery, or that loony bin reject Harper. But it's Charlotte that you best watch out for. Black Rock Island is hers now, and it has been ever since the night of the fire took her.
So there was a couple questions set up right from that opening line of dialogue, but I think that in the story and premise, we absolutely need to cover just a brief rundown of the Thornton history, and just how tragic and upsetting it really is. Now, in my opinion, when a game or a movie or any type of media is able to successfully pull off a very moving and depressing, like, storyline almost, that hinges on fear, that is 10 times scarier than any type of jump scare or, like, murder with an axe or anything that we would see. I think that this is so scary because the family seems so real and so distraught about their past.
It's very dysfunctional, the way that the Thornton family operates. No one's really been buddy-buddy. They all just go off their separate ways and try to leave behind the family and all the terrible memories that it holds.
So the family can technically be traced back all the way back to the Civil War, which does have its moments in this game, just learning about the bits and pieces, the family tree and such. But it all started with a spy for the Union Army called the Gray Lady. We're not actually sure what her real name is, but she is the heir traced all the way back to the Thorntons like 150 so years ago. And her work for the Civil War earned her the real estates of Black Rock Island, where she built the Thornton estates and everything, and that was the real foundation of the Thornton family.
That's where the Thornton family began to accelerate their problems, because they continued to industrialize the cotton industry down in the South, but now they had all the mechanical aids and machines of the industry in the North. So instead of slaves operating the plantations, it would have been workers, but they certainly weren't treated that much better. They would famously be paid less than the others, been subjected to beyond terrible working conditions, and they often were forced to work overtime to meet quotas, even if it was without pay.
And there happened to be a tragic accident. It happened like, I'm forgetting the time frame, early in the 1900s or something, right?
Maybe late 1800s, something like that. The way that the story goes is that the Thornton family had heinous working conditions and violations that had always plagued them even till the present day in the last generation of the Thorntons. And the most infamous example of this was the factory accident, where the workers would all bed down on the factory floor every now and again to meet quotas and stay overnight, otherwise they would be having their pay docked. And really, the Thorntons were too selfish to even give them places to bunk or sleep, so they would just bed down right on the factory floor. One time, while trying to meet a quota in the winter, they built up multiple fires in the factory so that they could stay warm over the night. There was no proper ventilation in the room, so the fumes built up, and when they all went to bed, none of them ever woke up again.
Yeah, that is extremely grim, and you can directly blame the Thorntons for that, because, I mean, it's their fault giving the workers that sort of conditions. But from there, the Thorntons really had a turning point. You had half of them saying, this was a terrible mistake that will never happen again, but let's just increase production, we gotta keep the wheels moving. And then you had another half of the Thornton family saying, this is egregious, we're out, we can't be a part of this.
It was the split down the middle of the Thornton family, where, as Wade puts it, there's the side of the good and the side of the bad, and he doesn't even know which side he is on.
So that's just the quick tragic background of the Thornton family, why they're so divided and hate each other for the most part. But before we jump into suspects, we need to talk about the ghost of Thornton Hall, Charlotte Thornton.
So Charlotte was the most recent tragedy in the Thornton history, having this taken place sometime in the 1980s. She was one of the few family members that everyone loved. She was super popular, everyone wanted her attention, everyone wanted the time of day from her, and really, she was such a sweet and kind person too. On her 21st birthday, she was having a great big dance in the ballroom, and they were celebrating everything, when there was a terrible tragedy and a fire broke out somehow. And in the end, Charlotte never made it out of the ballroom and burned to death on her 21st birthday. And that was when the Thornton family just left Black Rock Island. No one could bear the grief and the sadness anymore. They just left the island in ruins. The ballroom was never even knocked down, just left as charred ruins.
Her bedroom was never opened again. Like, this is a family that was 100% grief-stricken, and they can't let go of their already tainted past. It's just like, imagining myself in their shoes, it's horrendous. Seriously, it's terrifying.
Imagine, to say nothing of Charlotte's sister, Harper, who completely lost her mind, so they said, and just ran off into the woods, almost never to be seen again. She certainly had a hard time growing up after that.
And then legend has it that Charlotte's ghost still haunts Black Rock Island, and that's why people just don't return for the most part.
The only people who ever do go to Black Rock Island are the teenagers trying to hop the fence and see Charlotte on dares. And Wade says that most of them come and go without seeing anything, but the ones that meet her end up real messed up and usually go into shock.
So, suspect time. Let's jump into Wade. We just mentioned him.
Alright, so Wade Thornton is... I can't call him my favorite suspect because Harper is just such an amazing character. But if Harper wasn't in this game, I would just love Wade so much. Wade is super cool. He's full of funny euphemisms. He is technically the reason Nancy gets called here in the first place.
He's a part of the family that kind of disassociated themselves with the Thorntons that wanted to keep production up. He realizes that his family, what's his famous quote? They got their earnings in blood or something?
Yeah, the Thorntons paid for their land and money in blood and not always their own.
So Wade, you can make the argument, has a higher sense of morality as opposed to, I don't know, someone like Clara. He's just very conscious of the wrongdoings his family has made, and I think that he feels some sort of
responsibility.
Yeah,
he talks about how he went to prison actually because he heard a rumor that the Thorntons were up to their old tricks once and were hiring people who couldn't afford to quit and making them stay and work overtime without overtime pay. And so he went to go see if there was any truth to this once, and sure enough, he saw that the back door to the factory was padlocked and that no one was allowed to leave until they reached their quota. So he was furious and smashed the padlock, broke into the factory, trashed multiple machines and scared the workers half to death, and was then promptly arrested. And Clara wanted to scare him real bad, so she claimed. The second time Clara decided she wanted to scare somebody in her family.
Oh my gosh.
But in the end, Wade ended up sitting across from a judge that wanted to make an example out of him, and he ended up serving a few years in prison.
When I think of him, additionally, I think a lot of John Gray. He's got this he's definitely got a ghost hunter vibe with him, similar to John Gray. You always have like a conversation option of asking if you can listen to like ghost noises or something. And he claims that, well, he hangs out in the cemetery the entirety of the game. He claims he's like skulking around ghosts, looking for stuff. But my favorite part about him is that anytime you look at a tombstone, he'll approach you and he can name a lot of information about that person that was buried there. It's so interesting, and it's a great way of storytelling about the Thornton family.
Yeah, because honestly, that's one of my favorite parts of the game, just exploring the cemetery with Wade and having him give a little just eulogy for every dead person buried there.
Yeah, for real.
And I think it should be mentioned, too, that Julian and I were talking about it. This would have been a crazy game for John Gray to return. He would have made a much better suspect than Colton, and it would have been really cool for someone to be on the island that wasn't immediate family and maybe has a different perspective of things. But as far as Wade goes, one last thing that I think is important to mention about him is that he really is the reason that Nancy is on this case. Because alternatively, Savannah Woodham would have come down to the island herself and done the investigating, and she made up the lie about how she's, like, too scared to go back. Really, Savannah used to have a thing with Wade, and it ended somewhat poorly, and she doesn't have the guts to face him again. The first time you meet Wade, Nancy says, Savannah sent me, said she was too afraid to see the ghosts, and he goes, no, that ain't it. She's just afraid to see me.
Let's head on to Colton, though. Colton is the fiancé Jessalyn was supposed to marry the day before she went missing.
Yeah.
The biggest point that he serves to the mystery is that he is the one that reveals the entire wedding between him and Jessalyn is a sham, set up by Jessalyn's mom, Clara, and that he's actually got the eyes for this girlfriend of his named Lexi, and that's like a different little subplot, but essentially he's been hanging around the Thorntons. He's like the best family friend there could be, pretty much.
It's really, really interesting, actually, because Jessalyn and Colton have been friends since they were children, and as of like a year ago, Clara tried to arrange the marriage to marry for wealth and power. It's literally like
a classic old arranged marriage from the Middle Ages, kind of.
Yeah, it's some Game of Thrones level stuff. Because, like, what's going on is Colton's family is very politically connected. I believe his parents are senators or some kind of local politicians. And in the last campaign season, they really took a hit financially in order to win their spot in the re-election. And now, with the new campaign season coming up, they gotta find money fast, or they're not gonna have power going around for long.
We should have mentioned the Thorntons are filthy rich.
Yeah, even if it doesn't look it, because Thornton Hall itself is a dump.
We forgot to say that, but the idea is that he's marrying Jessalyn so he can get the funds for his parents' political season, and that
the Thorntons will have political powers if they are then connected by law to the senators.
It's so dirty. It's like there's no love involved. It's strictly for like the benefits of two families that this marriage is forced.
Jessalyn and Colton, it must be so awkward for them because they've been like best friends since childhood, and they're just kind of pawns in Clara's game.
But then, yeah, to be frank, Colton's the suspect we're touching on the least because he serves the least. I mean, he has a really important dialogue in the true endgame about Charlotte's disappearance, or not disappearance, her death, but...
He says that he gives Nancy a little piece of paper that Charlotte gave her on the night of her death. There's some unexplained questions about how Charlotte knew so many things.
I was just thinking that.
And I feel like they should have touched on that a bit more, but we'll cover that in the endgame. Otherwise, Colton is a decent guy, I guess. He just comes off as kind of insensitive and a jerk when you find out that he didn't even love Jessalyn in the first place. But then there's more to that story that you figure out as it goes on, that Jessalyn didn't really want to marry him either.
Alright, let's move on to the person pulling all the strings here, Clara Thornton.
So Clara was an interesting choice for the culprit, spoiler alert. So, because
it's not a traditional culprit, though.
There is no real friendly suspect in this game. No one is, like, super warm and giving Nancy boyfriend advice or anything.
Well, that's a lot to expect out of suspects. I think
that's a lot to expect out of Thornton Hall.
People are naturally depressed for a good reason, but they're not rude to Nancy.
Yeah, everyone is just like, well, I mean, probably every single character in the game dismisses her at one point.
Yeah,
or several.
Because they're all distraught.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of the family, especially like the older members like Wade and Clara, they see the cracks forming, and when Jesselyn goes missing, they're thinking this could be another tragic Charlotte situation where we lose the only agreeable member of our family again.
So Clara is Jesselyn's mom, and she's the character that what am I saying? So Clara is Jesselyn's mom, and every conversation you have with her, she sounds like she is seconds away from crying. She sounds so stressed out, all she wants is her daughter back, and the game really makes you feel sympathy for her from the start. But boy, does that quickly change at the end of the game.
I think that she remains a sympathetic character all the way through to the endgame letter, especially depending on the ending you pick. Because, well, when it comes down to it, there is a very important piece of Clara's character that so many people don't realize, and that's if you delve a little bit more into the family tree. That's that Clara never knew her family. She is not a Thornton by blood, really. Her daddy, she never met him, and Harper always teases her about that and insists that Nancy ask her to make her feel terrible. And her mother died when she was a child and never told her who her father was. Really, Clara had nothing and no one until she married into the Thornton family. She was just a cousin by law, and she was in the same generation as Harper and Charlotte, but they all got along apparently famously until the night of the fire. And that is something very important to consider when you get into the end game, which we'll get into in this review, and you realize why Clara did the things that she did in terms of the story.
You know what? I'm piecing together a theory. If there is ever a suspect, a female suspect, who wears all red, we see it with Lisa Ostrom, Corinne Myers, and Clara. They are holding on to something that they are not telling Nancy.
Are there any female suspects who wear red that have been innocent, though? That's the bigger question.
I don't know. I might be onto something here, though.
It's a classic tell, her interactive. We got you cornered.
But I think we gotta cover her relationship to Charlotte's death here and her character.
Well, that's more of an endgame thing,
It is, but I think for a blanket statement, we can say that by strictly accident, she's the one that is responsible for Charlotte's death.
We'll touch more on Clara's whole crime, so to speak, she committed in the endgame. Really, it's interesting because there is no real crime committed for which Nancy's been called into.
Clara is definitely a part of the Thornton half that was for pro-production. Like, just kind of sweep the 54 bodies under the rug. It won't happen again.
Go put a nice tombstone for them in the cemetery, and then just cover it up with some bushes.
She bats heads with Wade a lot. I mean, she's kind of responsible for him going to jail in the first place, but...
One thing that I really like is that Wade is supposed to be, like, emblematic of the humanitarian side of the family, but he doesn't always come off that way. Every character in this game has ambiguous morality, which I think is excellent in any storytelling in any media.
Facts. Alright, let's jump into your favorite.
Okay, so I wanted to mention this at the end of Wade, but I figured I'd wait, where when you go through Wade talking about all the characters in the game, and this makes for an amazing first playthrough if you talk about this in this order, is there is one tombstone in the cemetery, which, believe me, there's a lot of tombstones out there that are strange and curious, but one stands out amongst all the others, and that's Harper Thornton's tombstone. When you ask Wade about it, he says she didn't actually die, but was Charlotte's sister. She kind of had a snap at the funeral and had a mental breakdown, has never really recovered, and she ran off into the woods after that. Like 2 years later, she ran back into the house looking as thin as a spring sapling, and her dad was so angry at her that he put up this tombstone to remind her of the grief that she put the family through, thinking that they had lost both of those sisters in that branch of the family. Yeah. And it was said that Harper never really recovered. She's still kind of like a lunatic, and everyone says that she's dangerous, and she was often seen reading books out by her own tombstone. And so, if you read that tombstone and pay attention to it before you meet this next suspect, who, as I'm sure you've extrapolated, is Harper Thornton, then that's an amazing plot twist. There are very few games where there's a surprise suspect that none of the other suspects know about, and this is probably the best execution of it.
So Harper lives in the basement of Thornton Hall, and I'm just now realizing this. Has she lived there the past decades?
No, I think that she's just been kind of just on the roam, really. And she's come back to Thornton Hall for Jessalyn's bachelorette party.
Meeting Harper is so interesting because she leaves you an anonymous note saying that you need to recite Charlotte's nursery rhyme in the most, like, haunted points of the house. I know that's not what it's called, but just for the...
Where the dreadful meter is at its peak. She writes in all these rhymes and riddles.
Which I kind of liked, actually. But meeting her... Gosh, I guess she can actually kill you if you recite the nursery rhyme wrong.
Yeah, she drops a scythe on Nancy's head.
Yeah, nice, Harper. But she might have the coolest or one of the most sinister character designs of any Nancy Drew suspect.
She's got this crazy frizzy hair and like this long sweater, and she always points at Nancy dramatically in her conversations. Sometimes
her voice is so scary. She sounds like a witch.
She talks just like a witch. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else we can compare it to. Just cross her with Emily Griffin from Ghost Dogs of Moon Lake and Fiona Malloy. Like that.
Oh, that's fair, actually.
That's how you would get Harper Thornton.
She was Charlotte's sister. The two of them got along, it's presumed, but she snapped, for sure, when Charlotte died, and she's never been the same since. We don't know why that is, but we do find out at the end.
She calls herself a grandly unbalanced sociopath with delusions of grandeur and a history of violence. She, on the record, assaulted people at Charlotte's funeral and even pushed Clara off the Widow's Walk, which, if you don't know, a Widow's Walk is kind of like a balcony on the second floor of a house, usually seen in the South. Snooping
through a couple newspapers, you can also find out she's been instituted in a mental asylum, so there's that. She's not all there in the head.
Clara, that's interesting, though, because everyone claims, oh, it was a boarding school. That's especially what Clara claims. And Harper, who I think is a bit more believable in the situation, claims that there were bars on the windows and it was an institution for the criminally and mentally insane girls and women. And she was one of few girls to graduate. They send her like macaroni pictures and stuff to try to get her to come back and speak to the new students. But
good for you, Harper.
Congratulations.
Anyways, she's a great character, but we really have to cover the majority of her in the end game. That's where she really shines and stuff really comes through.
Until then, nothing she does really makes sense. She just speaks in riddles and has a delightfully dark sense of humor, giggling about throwing little children down wells and stuff. She has quite a couple of interesting parts of the game where you can like choose to tell everyone else that she's down there, and then when they get down in the basement, she's just like gone. And that's really scary because she says she'll do something awful if you tell anyone she's down there, and now she's on the loose.
It's also worth noting the entire game she's stoking a fire in a faulty furnace.
Yes.
Which may or may not have some major implications.
That was really good storytelling, honestly, but we'll get that to the ending because there was so much foreshadowing.
Alrighty. Puzzles.
Puzzles for this game, not a fan. Julian,
you're pretty harsh on them. I like the puzzles for the most part, but what I hated was that they reused two of them. That was just really lazy, and the true game-ending puzzle, pretty bad.
Okay, my biggest gripe with the puzzles in this game, if this is your first time playing, you can play this game for like an hour before you find the first puzzle.
That's true. The game really is just a lot of
exploring and talking
exposition being shoved at you. But that's not to say that there aren't bad puzzles or weak puzzles. Where is your hatred, or why do you not like it? Give me a reason.
Okay, so this is a theory that I've kind of developed. The first game to feature in-game hints and spoilers was Captive Curse. That was 4 games ago. Since then, the puzzle design, I think, has gradually gotten worse until you reach a development point like Thornton Hall, where it's become established in the game, her interactive game-making meta, that they're always going to be having solutions just right at your fingertips. All you do is click to get them, the hints and solutions, to the point where I feel like they were kind of like, oh, we didn't make this clear enough? That's okay, the player can just click on a hint and figure out what to do. And I feel like they rely on that way too much. It seems like they made this game intending for a first-time player to need hints, and I don't think that's good to game design.
No, that's a good point. There's a couple puzzles actually with multiple solutions, but only one accepted answer. Which
definitely the nonograms.
That's like one of the 7 deadly sins of Nancy Drew games.
It's even more in your face in this one because the way that it works with the 2-part domino nonogram things that you do twice. First, open up the fountain outside the ballroom, and then again to open up Charlotte's bedroom.
Yes, thank you for using that puzzle for interactive. Much appreciated.
It's much better than Shadow at the Water's Edge nonograms, because at least I understand these. But what makes it so insufferable is that there are 2 solutions, at least 2, and only one of them is accepted. And if you get the wrong solution, it doesn't just not yield the answer, the reward for the puzzle, but Nancy openly says, I solved the puzzle, but something's not right. And you literally, it gives you the impression that, oh man, I can't do this puzzle yet, can I? I have to go do something else.
Yeah, that's so garbage, because if you think about it, that means that they made a dialogue line for the correct solution that doesn't open the door, but they couldn't just accept 2 solutions. What the heck were they thinking?
Now, the last bad puzzle I think we should talk about, and I guess it's not necessarily
Well, we still
bad.
gotta cover the great puzzles.
I want to cover that next. I want to get the bad ones out of the way.
Okay, fair.
So, the clock puzzle. The clock puzzle is so infamous.
It's nice the first time.
Yeah, but the second time, when you're in a burning building and the room is filling with smoke, it gets a little bit tedious.
It's the worst thing they could have done to end it.
Really, I think it's a clever puzzle, and I wouldn't mind a moderate reskin of it, maybe with 3 clocks as opposed to 5. Basically, the way that works is, when you're in Charlotte's bedroom, which is a very cool milestone in the game, being the first person to get in there in like 20 years. So there is a mantle over the fireplace in Charlotte's bedroom with 5 clocks. If you pull a lever, they all start ticking, but they tick at different paces. And the way that you solve this puzzle is you have to find out what time you're supposed to wind each clock back to, so that when you pull the lever and all clocks start going at their own individual paces, they will all eventually stop at midnight. And it's really, really challenging, really, really difficult, because like every time one clock hits midnight, then it stops and you have to reset it. And it's the kind of puzzle that you can't do in your head. It absolutely requires that you write things down. The first time you do it, it's a little bit lenient on you, because you have the option to just like realize that 2 of the clocks move at the same speed, so that's kind of like 2 already done. They both need the same time. But man, was it a terrible puzzle to bring back for the end game when everything's stressful. An end game puzzle should be simple yet challenging. It should be like the Deadly Device one, where you just have to like put together the schematic in the Faraday cage. It's got to be something short enough that you feel a sense of panic and terror that you need to get it done. But not like this, where you have 15 minutes to do it while the house burns around you. And it's just, it's the kind of puzzle where you're gonna need every second.
I would have liked to interact more. Like, imagine if we could have some talking points with Clara in the burning room.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we just hear her, like, shout occasionally how depressed or how woeful
She says some actually really interesting things, but again, we should wait for the end game. So much happens in the ending of this review.
Okay, so the best parts about this game's puzzles are the ones that interact directly with the family tree. I loved, and I think it was so well done, how they brought back the family tree, needing to know the Thornton heritage and everything for a lot of puzzles, especially interacting with the cemetery and such. The most notable one being the scavenger hunt and how you had to break into Jesselyn's phone password. There were so many clever instances of, like, having to go back and look at this family tree. And the puzzle that I have in mind is you have to look at the epitaph. In retrospect to being Jesselyn, you have to think, okay, well, who would Jesselyn's Nana have been? Oh, you read in a book here that it would have been
Karenina.
Karenina, yeah, sure. And then you have to go to Karenina's grave, look at her epitaph. Then there's a little, like,
8th word, first letter, and then that's the first word of the password.
It's really clever. It maybe takes a minute to catch on, but once you do, it's a really cool puzzle. And then similarly, having to interact with the family tree, there's the locket at the end of the game, which was really cool. There's the Here I Am 1867 Right puzzle, and that involves a lot more looking back at the good old family tree. And then there's like Beauregard and his significance with opening Charlotte's box. There were just a lot of really clever storytelling things that built up your knowledge of Thornton history, which was excellent.
I really like the stained glass puzzle in the crypt. I'm a kind of a sucker for pretty symmetry puzzles like that, especially when the end result is just like pretty stained glass and things like that. But at the same time, I also have a bit of critiques for like the puzzle you just mentioned. For one thing, the graveyard hunt puzzle to figure out Jesselyn's password. I feel like that puzzle could have used a little bit of a nerf at places, because like, I think it's challenging enough as it is to like look at the family tree and figure out who is who and what their name is and where their grave is and then what their epitaph is. I don't think you have to throw in the complications of figure out which of these family members went by the nickname Dodge, because it's not like it's written Roger Dodge Drummonds on the family tree. You have to go around the place and read multiple different books to figure out everyone's nicknames and stuff. I really liked the Okay, so the reason why I think the scavenger hunt puzzle was so good, though, is because it gives you a really good reward, and that's being able to get into Justin's phone. And one thing in particular on Justin's phone that was a great reward was the audio logs. Jesse and Addison you call multiple times in the game. It's sad that you never really get a follow-up with her. I assume that she feels better knowing that Jess is okay. But Addison tells you that Jesse and her were recording themselves exploring the mansion like they were on a ghost hunter show, and you get to listen to like all 7 of those recordings, and they're fun. But what was really clever is how they worked in a lot of exposition and new leads in the task list through that. Where, for one great example, there was a part of that sequence where they drop something, and then there's just shuffling, you can't say what they say, and she said, oh crap, it's through the floorboards, we'll just get it in the AM, let's get out of here. And you realize that they had something important that they dropped and it fell beneath the floorboards somewhere in the house. So then you have to go look through the house to look for loose floorboards, and when you find it, you get this cool puzzle that's like with the logical maze and stuff where you can't go over yourself. It's a really well designed puzzle. There's been some kind of like it in like opening Rachel's secret door in Waverly's Academy where you can't go over yourself on the line.
Wait, the maze spelling out the color?
Yeah, but there's been... It's a double-sided puzzle, and I think that both versions of it are really interesting. I like it.
Yeah, final blanket statement for puzzles. They're pretty good, though it is definitely not perfect. There's a couple of egregious sins in this game. Cough, cough. Not accepting more than one solution. But either way, it's a fun game that I would still recommend to friends.
So now we're getting into music for this game.
The truth is, music is good, but it's like...
limited.
It's limited. It's not something you play outside of the game.
It's very, very good for serving the purpose of having atmospheric connections and ambiance for the game. It really, really well fits the rundown estate, but nothing in this game really has a rhythm or a beat that makes you want to listen to it.
Okay.
So really, instead of the usual 6 or 7, we're only going to have about 4 or 5 songs to play for this review.
The first song that I really want to cover, though, is called Past. Past is... It's the track you hear the most, and it's so sad, so depressing. And what else do we know that's so sad and depressing? The Thornton family past. That's definitely why the track was called this. It starts off with like just the really small piano notes playing, and then it develops into something just like heart-wrenching. Seriously, it's such a good track, and it serves such a great purpose with a really deep meaning.
The great cello in it just echoes the Lost theme from Deadly Device.
For sure. I mean... great song. It's like the Thornton family national anthem.
What I love about it so much is just that it means something else for every character, besides maybe Colton, who's a youngster. But to Clara, it might mean how she lost her sister or her cousin and her great friend, and the family tree has suffered because of that. For Wade, it might mean how he let his anger get the best of him and lost multiple years of his life in prison and ruined his relationship with Savannah. And for Harper, it must mean so many different things. She's the one I think of the most when I hear this track. We'll go ahead and play it. So I think that even though it's not that tremendous of a track, we should cover Dark. Dark is probably one of the more ominous and foreboding themes in the game. It's what you hear on the title screen. It's not very often that you see a tuba or a trombone or whatever this is being spooky. And it's not like violent and in your face. Really low, it's ominous, it's scary, and there's little that we can say to describe it. Again, there's not really much of a rhythm or beat to it. It's just like, it's some spooky stuff. Okay. So we'll go ahead and play Dark, right? So next I have the Ghost track, and I think that this is a really interesting track that really stands out from all the others, and from most other soundtracks in the other games, because this is one where the key musical part of it is actually vocals. There's only a handful of tracks in the franchise that have capitalized on vocals for the main bit, and the only ones that come to mind is just like the Olympic track from White Wolf of Icicle Creek, or maybe...
played once every 100 songs.
Yeah, I never hear that song when I play the game, but it's a good one. Or maybe like the, research theme, parts of it at the end from Deadly Device, regardless, you never really hear much vocals in the Nancy Drew soundtrack, so it really was cool for this game, because singing, and especially this opera kind of singing, is really emblematic and foreboding of the Charlotte Thornton ghost that you encounter multiple times throughout the game. And really, when people hear this track, the first thing that they probably think about is the singing and how eerie it sounds. But to me, where the music really shines, and I might go as far as to call this my favorite piece of music in the entire game, is what happens as soon as the singing stops. It's just this really quiet and subtle, almost like piano or like a xylophone. It's some sort of percussion that's just really quiet and twinkling, with all sorts of other spooky noises, like maybe some light organ in the background, and it just sounds the way that the game looks. It's all just creepy, starry sky, way in the middle of the night, and I think that those 10 seconds are probably the best of music in this game. So I'll go ahead and play it right here.
Final track that we have to cover is really unique because it's like 20 to 30 seconds. It's called the Ladybug track.
So, I'm not sure if it's actually called that, but it's certainly about the Ladybug nursery rhyme. So whenever there's a real prominent Charlotte haunting in the game, you hear this song. And it's very, very curious and peculiar because it's actually just a nursery rhyme being sung in the most creepy way possible. It's one of the only tracks ever with discernible lyrics, and it really adds to the presence of there being a supernatural happening going on, because we almost never hear lyrics in the games. The only one time I can think of is probably Elizabeth singing her song in Sea of Darkness. Mm-hmm. And that's the last game in the franchise before this.
With her eyes so bright.
Okay, yeah, that one too. But regardless, this track has just something else for it going. The lyrics to the actual song itself are just even creepier when you think about it.
I can't fathom how this is a nursery rhyme.
If I'm not mistaken, the lyrics go, "Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home. Your house is on fire and your children are gone. All but one, sweet Charlotte Ann, and she hid under the frying pan."
Wow, what an uplifting nursery rhyme.
I don't know who wrote that and thought, the kids will love it, that'll put them right to sleep, but they suck at their job and they need to be fired.
Yeah, what do you think? We'll play a snippet of it here. Is it something you would play to a newborn?
Yeah, that's a good way to gauge it. Would you let your child listen to this? Because the YouTube algorithm would.
Okay, that's about all there is to cover on music. There's a couple other tracks, but like, not to say they're not notable, but they really only serve the purpose of being like...
There is no rhythm in them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just sound effects.
It's like sound
whistling.
effects.
It's like Outlast 2.
It really is. It's like not catchy music, but it still serves a good purpose. It's like hard to rank. But let's cover atmosphere now. And with atmosphere, we're going to be morphing in some of the hauntings, which is what this game's famous for.
Yeah, so we each have a favorite haunting picked out that we're going to talk about. But real quick, there's something a bit niche and nuanced on this channel that I want to bring up for this game, and that is the occasionally mentioned Scooby-Doo factor. So multiple times when ranking games, we have referenced the Scooby-Doo factor, and that kind of applies to games where there's some spooky stuff going on and exuberant characters and wacky places to explore, stuff like that. We've called Blackmore Manor a Scooby-Doo game, Hauntings of Castle Malloy, Captive Curse, because that's like a cool place to explore with like a monster or something going around, and they also have a bit of a goofy vibe. This game, though, I would not call it that, because the difference between a game like this and Captive Curse or Castle Malloy is that there is no serious bit of this game. There is no silly part of this game.
It's depressing.
It's just complete deadpan storytelling. Everything is spooky, everyone's afraid, everyone's having to confront their past that they've been running from for so long. Mm-hmm. And it just really, really gives a real visceral and guttural feeling to the whole experience. So, this is one of the few games where Nancy's choices... This might be the only game where Nancy's choices can directly result in a character dying. That's not the game over sequence, that's the ending. So that to me says that this is a game that deals with some heavy consequences and themes.
Before we jump into Hauntings, let's give a brief rundown of this setting. It's really dissected into 3 different places. I would say There's the Thornton Hall, the actual like estate that's dismal and crumbling and
Complete
everything.
derelict house. No one's lived there since Charlotte died.
There's the outside area with the underused burned ballroom, in my opinion, and then the great cemetery and crypt. And then there's underneath the hall with Harper, and you get kind of like whatever that place is supposed to be. There's a couple secret passageways down there too. I don't know. Out of all the places I listed though, like, I have to say the estate is still my favorite. Like, it's perfectly scary. It just looks like a place that...
Tons of secret passageways, too.
Well, yeah, but they nailed it on the head. It looks like a place that hasn't been touched in 40 years, and there was, like, something tragic happened there.
Now, hang on. Here's a fun question.
Specifically the factory.
Oh, the factory room is... I'd call that the scariest place in the game.
Yeah.
Well, there's this one screen. The first time you look there and you see, like, the bags of cotton or whatever hanging from the ceiling, and they're, like, swaying back and forth, that is the scariest screen in the game, without a doubt. But I want to pose a question real quick. Every now and again, we like to compare games in the atmosphere setting. Which cemetery do you like more? The Boulay Estate Cemetery from Game 17 or the Thornton Hall Family Cemetery? Because they're both different. The Boulay Estate, it's got a garden with where Bruno Boulay is buried, and it's constantly raining, and then the rest of it is just massive, and there's like 5 or 6 different locations you can explore. But it's kind of like walking on an outskirts screen. This place, on the other hand, you can explore every inch of, though it's substantially smaller, and you can get a little, like, biography spiel given by Wade on pretty much everyone buried. So what do you prefer?
I'm going to go with Thornton Hall because, A, there's a lot more to do there, and so many puzzles interact so well with the cemetery, making it just an integral part of the game.
Both games did have a graveyard hunt, more or less.
Yeah, but more had to do with the Thornton Hall Cemetery.
I guess I can agree with that, because the Thornton Hall Cemetery, there were even hauntings there. You could, like, look at the statue of the woman, she looks at you, and, like, the Grim Reaper's hands move.
Right.
Man, that's another thing we forgot to mention. In this game, we forgot...
It's covered in Hauntings.
Yeah. It's just we forgot to mention it last review is what I meant.
Oh.
So... If I had to pick a favorite place, I would probably go with the cemetery. Just because I love Wade so much, he has such great conversations, even if Harper is a more interesting character. But, man, Wade's cemetery is just so cool. It's foggy, there's like this weird, creepy whistle ambient music going on, and there's like the Grim Reaper statue in the Franklin Memorial that looks at you. So that's spooky too.
Okay, jumping into Hauntings now, the majority of them do have to do with Charlotte's ghost. She's the cover art of the game. It would be pretty weird if no Hauntings or didn't cover... She's the cover art of the game. It'd kind of be weird if she wasn't the focal point of Hauntings, but in Jamie's opinion, and I can see why, the scariest Hauntings are without her.
Yeah, so for one thing, there's like at least 10 Hauntings in this game that have nothing to do with Charlotte, and to me I think it's really cool because it's hinting that those are the ghosts of the factory accident workers that you see. Every now and again you'll like open a door and there'll be a shadow that just jumps from the wall and like disappears, and that's just so spooky to me. There's one that's really clever where when you go up the stairway, the shadow of the banister moves and like it just starts going by like you're on a gazebo or something, or like the staircase is moving.
The one that never fails to give me a heart attack is that brown cat thing skirting around the floor.
I am pretty sure that's an armadillo, and that's actually a really cool reference that I think we have time to cover real quick, because I think it's a cool piece of trivia. So my understanding, because that's the one haunting that no one understands, in the factory every now and again, this blob just runs across the floor every now and again, and it's like, it's a sizable blob. It's like the size of a football. You always notice it, and you're like, what the heck is that? And my understanding is it's supposed to be an armadillo, which is more or less a reference to the old original Bela Lugosi Dracula movie, where apparently, because armadillos are native to the South in the United States, no one else in the rest of the world had really ever seen an armadillo, and it was kind of just like a foreign, unknown creature. And so, in Dracula's castle in the original Bela Lugosi Dracula, they actually had armadillos just like scurrying across the floor because it put audiences at unease and at edge because they had no idea what they were looking at. And I guess that was kind of paying homage to the old Universal classic. I just wrote a whole term paper on that. But it's just really cool how they kind of like conflated Thornton Hall with the old Dracula Transylvania Manor with the armadillo reference.
So yeah, in conclusion, my favorite hauntings are probably the ones that are the most subtle. You know, opening a door and a shadow pans across the screen. Or as Jamie said, the banister shadows moving.
Or the paintings that blink at you, like here.
Yep. Or like...
It's even creepier when you realize that there's a peephole behind that painting. Because that might be Harper blinking at you.
Or opening the crypt and the coffins move. Something really subtle like that makes you second guess what you just saw or feel super uneasy.
But we gotta, like, address the big budget cinematic cutscene hauntings.
Mm-hmm.
So, Charlotte had an amazing design. I love how they gave her...
In the masquerade gown and everything.
Yeah, she wears this flowing red dress and, like, a black masquerade mask, and she's distinguishable. You know Charlotte when you see her, and she just looks so haunting. I think you said your favorite haunting with her was in the ballroom?
Oh, I said that in the last review. One of the most notable hauntings is the first time you access the ballroom, which is obviously where she burned to death. She comes at you, like, slowly. She's just, like, fading in towards you, and then she burns up all in a ball of flames. It's so scary.
And Nancy passes out right after that.
Another one happens, like, immediately, almost from the start of the game. The first time you're up in the hallway, you look down the room towards Charlotte's door, and she's, like...
In the hallway.
Yeah, she's
looking... The creepy thing that I never realized until this playthrough, she's looking at the painting of Clara.
Really?
Yeah, and then she turns to look at Nancy. She's looking at the painting of Clara where they covered up her sister, Harper.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's great. All the scares with Charlotte were very well done.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Jamie's favorite.
Okay, so here I come with my controversial opinion. As always, this is to me is like the equivalent of the Yumi haunting from Shadow at the Water's Edge, where there's like the creepy stuff going on in her apartment in the late game. But it's the second haunting that takes place in the hallway. So at this point, you've established from talking to other people like Clara that nobody knows where the key to Charlotte's bedroom is, and that room locked itself up tight the day she died, and no one has been in there in like 30 years. So no one knows what it's like in there. Presumably the furniture has never been moved, and it's just so spooky to think that no one's been in there for the longest time. And, like, someone could be living in there and no one would know. And then eventually, like, before the halfway point of the game, you turn that corner and you look down that hallway and the door is ajar. And, like, the ladybug music starts to play. Charlotte is nowhere to be seen, but unmistakably, the door is open. And after, like, 8 seconds, it just slams shut, like someone on the other side just kicked it. And you can approach the door and pull on the doorknob all you want, but it will not open again until you find the key part to solve the horrible nonogram puzzle. But I have something that I think would be a great segue into the ending of the game that I think makes this haunting so scary, and evidence for the conspiracy theory that the hauntings are real and that it's not the fire department's excuse. So, in every endgame letter, as this is a game with multiple endings, the fire department insists that everyone goes to the hospital to be checked for exposure to fumes because Harper was pumping the house full of carbon monoxide, which can cause hallucinations. And so, depending on the ending, Nancy can enthusiastically insist, that's what happened, there were no ghosts, we were all just huffing carbon monoxide and started hallucinating. But the thing is, in this particular hallucination, where Nancy sees Charlotte's bedroom door open, you can clearly see the clocks on the fireplace mantle. Nancy has not been in that room for 30 years. She's never been in that room. No one has been in that room in 30 years, but Nancy can see the clocks on the mantle on the other side. There is no way that she would know how to hallucinate that, which to me stands to reason that door was actually open, and that was an actual haunting.
That's pretty good analysis. There's also the fact that the ghost kills you.
Yeah, there are multiple sequences where the ghost can kill Nancy. Some people speculate that that's actually Harper attacking Nancy and killing her, which, man, those are chilling parts of the game. But bottom line, I think we should cover the endgame sequence now and how it begins. So there's a cool, clever puzzle of getting all these corners on this number door to add up to 18. I like that puzzle. It's decent.
And then it's rewarding. We find Jessalyn.
She's just sitting there, huddled in a ball on the other side. And talking to her is a really, really chilling part of the game because of one dialogue option that few people probably choose. Jessalyn insists, same as Harper, you cannot tell anyone that you found me that I'm down here. And Nancy goes, so you did run away. And before you find out why she's down there, you have the option to say, okay, I'll help you, what do you need? Or you can say, you'd better tell me right now what's going on, or I'm gonna tell everyone you're down here. And if you say that, Jessalyn's like she's about to tear up. And she says, you could have helped, you know that. And she says, fire's so red. And Nancy goes, what are you doing? And she says, just don't make this any harder. and then she recites the rest of the Charlotte rhyme, and then Charlotte just comes out of nowhere and kills Nancy.
Like a dog you can summon or something.
Yeah, like, people say, oh, that's just Harper doing that, and they just wanted to render in Charlotte doing that, and that was like the code word or something. But that's just creepy. That's so creepy and unexplained.
So let's talk about what happened the night Jessalyn truly disappeared. She was doing the scavenger hunt with her friend Addison, and as Addison mentioned, she broke away from her and discovered something, came back a few hours later, and was not the same, almost as if she had been possessed.
Yeah, that was the creepiest thing in the recordings, is that around 2 a.m., Jessalyn goes missing. At 5 a.m., she reappears, and then she's gone again.
So what happened in that 3-hour time frame is that she found her cousin Harper, and Harper dropped the bombshell of a secret that Clara was the one responsible for Charlotte's death, because what happened is, in a series of events that was really poorly explained, but still really cool, Charlotte had written Clara out of her will, which, why would a 21-year-old have a will? Who knows? But anyways, Clara was heartbroken by this, and in order to scare Charlotte, sort of just get back at her, she set the ballroom on fire. Really, really weird.
Clara was just kind of out of her head then, but the thing is, she wasn't angry at Charlotte. She wasn't, like, heartbroken at that. She was terrified, because we remind you, Clara has no family. She married into the Thornton family. She never knew who her parents were. She was an only child, and if she didn't get this inheritance, then she would continue to be no one and die as no one. Mm-hmm. None of them in the family liked her but Charlotte and Harper. They were all buddies back before Charlotte died. And so when Clara realized that she was being written out of Charlotte's will, she would grow up to have absolutely nothing and just be the estranged aunt to all the other children that no one knew. And what's really sad that you kind of have to extrapolate on your own is that even after Charlotte's death happened and everything went to Clara and she was able to inherit the estate, she ended up giving birth to Jessalyn and remarrying or something. And that's so sad to think that everything could have worked out just fine and she would still be the mother of the most loved family member in the Thornton family since Charlotte, and that everything would have worked out fine for her and she wouldn't be ostracized by the family. So that's so sad to think that Charlotte really died for nothing, and that even without the inheritance, she would have still been loved by the Thorntons.
So Jessalyn, whether she wanted to believe it or not, I think she knew in the back of her head this had to be true, because as she says, her mother is so cold, it just makes perfect sense.
She never really has had the closest relationship with her mother.
Yeah.
Addison said that they used to call her Chairman Mom.
So the true endgame starts where Jessalyn goes up to confront Clara, and we solve a cheeky little puzzle to find the will buried in the wall down in the basement. Very, very foreign location to hide a will. But it says that, yeah, it confirms Clara was completely written out of it. All of it was to go to Harper. So Harper is the true heir to Thornton Hall. And then from there, you get a spontaneous fire happening. I don't know. The top of the screen is all smoke. You gotta...
I mean, to be fair, they've been building to a fire happening the entire game.
So you find the will, you got the bombshell of a secret with you right now, and then you're going back to the basement, and Harper is like, she's whacked out of her head.
She has just been having a bit too much carbon dioxide.
Monoxide. Smoking the good old dioxide.
Yeah.
But this is where we get the first game-changing decision. We can choose to
help Harper,
be extremely ignorant and flee the scene of Thornton Hall with the fire and leave Jessalyn and Harper, or we can make them like a makeshift little minecart to help Harper and Jessalyn get out of there. And just a disclaimer, you're heartless if you just leave right now.
Yeah, because if you leave at that moment, then it just goes right to the endgame letter, and the way that things wrap up is that Harper and Jessalyn eventually get out, and they're both immediately hospitalized, and their condition is unknown. It never clarifies that they have, like, brain damage or anything.
It's the shortest and most depressing in-game letter of all time.
Clara dies in the fire, and Wade just goes completely AWOL and AFK. No one knows where he is.
That's the objective, terrible ending.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about the good ending, where you help Jessalyn and Harper, and they get them out of the house safe, and then you go on like the good Samaritan you are to help Clara too. Disclaimer, Dad did not care for Clara. He said leave her, and then he did not realize the ramifications of his decision. Clara dies in the fire. But if you go to save Clara, then you have to do the clock puzzle again, which is terrible, and you get the bona fide good ending. Now this one is very interesting, but not as interesting as the in-between it.
What I didn't understand about this good ending is that the only thing that's different, saving Clara, results in every other plot point getting a really happy resolution.
Now, I think I can understand it because by Clara making it out of that fire, everyone in the family finally gets justice, and it wraps up the story of what happened to Charlotte.
So, something I drew from the end game is that the actual building, Thornton Hall, was symbolic of the curse kind of put on the Thorntons and how they can never find happiness while that building still stands.
You see, this is the craziest thing about the ending, which I thought was so interesting, where Clara, wanting to make up for everything, actually transfers all of her inheritance right to Harper just immediately because she wants everything to go the way that Charlotte wanted it to. And so Harper, now being the sole owner of the deed to Thornton Hall, has it razed. She has the whole thing torn down and turned into a nice sunny park in memorial of everyone who died on Black Rock Island.
Mm-hmm. And we actually see it, like a picture. It's like a beautiful meadow, and there she is chilling with a book or something.
Just right next to her tombstone.
Yeah, that was so nice.
It's so crazy because, to me, I thought that was so interesting that in the good ending of this game, Thornton Hall is torn to the ground. Because as Julian said, it is the stain on Black Rock Island.
Yeah, it symbolizes everything wrong with the family.
The bloodied past and all the people who died there, all the conniving and backstabbing that went on. Everything in the past 200 years, it's letting go. It's the Thornton family finally saying, if we're gonna have a bright future, we need to demolish our past.
Other things that happen, Colton and Jessalyn are able to hash out their... Well, I mean, they didn't really have any differences, but they're able to agree that Colton should be with Lexi and they're good friends again. So hooray, that happens. And
Except I suppose that Colton's family loses the re-election.
Yeah, we didn't get a follow-up there. Other than that, Wade and Savannah, they're able to work together, I guess. I guess they get back together.
Try to rekindle their friendship or relationship from there. And that's really interesting.
Good for them.
Now, the thing that we want to talk about, though, is the in-betweener ending. Because this was fascinating.
Well, right before we cover that, I was going to say that I actually didn't like how harsh of a positive turn it took at the very end. Like, this is such an amazing story of depression, and, like, it just felt weird for
grief and remorse and all this stuff.
To do a complete 180 at the end game letter, like, oh, everything is all cheerful and sunny now. I think this in-between route is perfect and my favorite ending.
Yeah, so I have a couple critiques. I don't see any reason why Wade and Savannah can't get back together in this in-between ending, but they don't.
Yeah, they don't.
If they did, then that would be my favorite ending too. But I kind of like the whole tearing down Thornton Hall idea. Anyhow.
No, I think this one's perfect.
Okay.
This is a hot take, by the way. But.
So again, in every ending of the game, the fire department claims that, oh yeah, if you saw anything weird at the estate, it's probably because you were being poisoned by carbon monoxide. And to be fair, there is so much foreshadowing that you guys are being poisoned the whole game. Nancy says to Harper, hey, are you sure you should be using that old furnace? Because you could be pumping the house full of fumes. She goes, sounds like upstairs people problems. I'm downstairs people.
Nancy also spontaneously just goes to sleep twice.
Yeah, that should be noted too. This game takes place over the course of 3 days, but Nancy sleeps through all of them because she's like in a mini coma. And you can even say to Claire at one point, hey, you don't look so good right now. And Claire just goes, it's getting a little hard to breathe in here. And it's just like, can you be any more obvious than that?
But what happens in the in-between is what you have to do is save Jessalyn and Harper and then choose not to go after Clara.
Yeah.
So you let Clara burn alive in the Thornton Hall.
It should be noted, though, that, like, when you do save Clara, she says all this crazy stuff, like, I sat by your grave every night for a year, what else do you want from me? And really, it's Clara just trying to make her peace because she thinks she's going to die.
So why do we love this in-between ending so much? Well, it's actually because of one very special line of dialogue that happens at the end of Nancy's letter.
So Nancy claims that after the fire department says that, oh, everything you saw was due to carbon monoxide, so there wasn't actually any hauntings, it was all in your head. For the longest time, I remember Julian hated that ending because he thought that all the hauntings were real and that they were so cool, and to just say they were fake because you were inhaling fumes is such a cop-out.
It seemed cheap, right?
But then
this ending resolved it
perfectly. Nancy claims that the next day when she was in town, she didn't feel so sure about the fire department's excuse because she heard from some unnamed townsfolk girl that she had seen the smoke rising over Black Rock Island and had seen the figures of 2 women floating above it all, Clara and Charlotte.
That I have goosebumps right now thinking about it. This is why this would be one of the best movie interpretations of a Nancy Drew game. Its storytelling and resolution would make it phenomenal.
Clara becomes the second ghost of Thornton Hall in this morally ambiguously bad ending. That's her punishment. Not that she like goes to hell or anything, but
I think that's the most fair way that you can wrap up such a depressing story.
Her punishment is to just spend eternity haunting the cursed family estate with the girl that she killed.
Dang. And it's not like it's strictly 100% terrible. You still saved Harper and Jesselyn. The true will gets uncovered. There's still some glimmers of light, but
it sets up for a sequel, though.
It needed that setback of, like, horror. That Clara's character was so tragic, and she got what she deserved in a way.
Yeah.
Whether she deserved it is up to interpretation, but you can't deny that it's insanely well-written storytelling.
It is something else.
It's so good. Okay, let's rank the game.
Ranking this game. So, just give the quick rundown real quick. The way we like to rank our games is with a scale 1 through 10. No, we like to rank them with letters A through F. A being great, F being terrible, and then the S tier is reserved for the best of the best at the top. We don't like to give numbers out of 10 because some Nancy Drews are better on paper than they are in practice. So this is what we do instead.
I'll go first. So, I feel like I would have a guilty conscience if I gave this game anything but an S.
This game is so iconic.
Yeah, it's so iconic, and the storytelling is almost unparalleled.
Julian and I, between the both of us, I don't mean to interrupt you, between the two of us, we have started 3 people playing this franchise with this as their first game.
No, that's a good point. We recommend this game as a start to the Nancy Drew franchise.
Julian's roommate, my girlfriend, and my girlfriend's friend, they all started with Ghost of Thornton Hall, and they loved it.
So, I mean, given that this is the game we all recommend, it speaks volumes to what kind of game it is. It's a really, I feel guilty calling it enjoyable, but it's just like a great game.
It's gripping.
It's gripping, sure. And that's not to say it's not perfect, because when I compare it to other S-tier games, I think I like them more than this game.
I would call this probably the S-tier game, the game we've given an S-tier to, because spoiler, I'm also going to give this an S-tier, but this is the game that I think we put in the S-tier that has the worst puzzles of any S-tier game.
And suspects are weak at times, too.
But it's a game with such a great story and
yeah,
endings.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, 3 endings, that's so unique, so cool. I just gotta applaud Her Interactive on this. I'm pretty sure this is, like, their original story, too.
I mean, they ported this game for the iPad. If I'm not mistaken, this is the only game that they ported for the iPad. So they must have been really proud of it to think this would make a great transition and a great message for ourselves if we were to make this game for a new platform.
Good on them. They made an amazing game with an amazing story, and they deserve all the praise for it.
And for the record, Charlotte Thornton would make an amazing Halloween costume. Well, that concludes our review for Nancy Drew: The Ghost of Thornton Hall. That is a double S from us. That's one of 2 or 3 games to get the double S standard, and I feel like it deserves it. It's solely for being as iconic as it is.
Both Gothic Southern games have been double S.
If Game 34 is a Gothic Southern game, we can expect some good things from it.
Yeah, but we hope you enjoyed our review, and I want to know a couple things. What do you think of the Hauntings? Which was your favorite ending? I don't know. There's just like so many conversations to be had over this game. It sparks a great dialogue. So we hope you enjoyed the review, guys. Sorry this one was a little delayed, but we're really happy to get it up.
Yeah, we had some trouble with Secret of the Old Clock. We finally played it, so we are now qualified to review Secret of the Old Clock. But getting you the long play and the footage is another story.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Stay tuned for more reviews to come, and vote for Holt.
Vote for Holt, everybody.